Hello everyone, I'm Mara Benitez, Library Assistant here at the Seguin Public Library, here today with the presentation on Ancestry 101. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be talking today about Ancestry.com, which is a free online resource that's available to you through the library. And these are the things we're going to be covering. We're going to be answering all of these questions. What is Ancestry? Ancestry is an online genealogy research platform. It's a database of indexed records that allows us to dig into our family history. So it's got lots of census records, military records, all kinds of birth, death, and marriage records that are really helpful if you're starting to get into genealogy and trying to find your family history. So how do we find it? Through your library. It's free to you if you're a library user. You don't even have to have a library card. You just have to be in the building and on our Wi-Fi. Once you're on our Wi-Fi, you can access it through our library website. So what can it do? It can help you learn more about your family history and also help you share about your family history. So one of the great things that lots of people love about Ancestry is that it is online. So you're able to share whatever you have found with your family members and your friends, and you're also able to find whatever else other people have found online. We're also going to cover where you should start with some tips and tricks for gathering information, as well as how you should search. So some basic guidelines for just helping you get more out of your search. So let's start looking at this. So Ancestry.com, like I said, it's the largest repository of online family history records in the world. There's over 20 billion unique records and more than 32,000 databases. The library edition includes all of the databases worldwide. So basically you're going to get access to everything that you would have on your paid subscription that you usually get from Ancestry.com, as well as a few more that you would usually get in the Explorer account. So, and you're getting this all for free, just available through the library. So it's just saying there that there's more records that are accessible than Personal Edition. So like I said, accessing Ancestry in the library is going to be through our website, which is library.seguintexas.gov. And if you're here with us in person, it's already loaded up onto your computer, ready to go. Let me go ahead and pull that up on my screen so that way we can see it here, how to access it. But from our library webpage, actually come up to the top so you can see. So once you load your library webpage, if you scroll down to the very, very bottom, there's a list of EResources, all in a bunch of different buttons. All of these are available to you for free through the library, but the one we're looking for is at the very bottom, Ancestry.com. And you'll see there's a couple here that are marked in library use only. So if you open those at home, they're going to redirect you to your normal Ancestry.com website. But if you're in the library, it opens up straight away to our free Ancestry Library account. Okay, so once we are on there, there's a couple different things that we can look at. So we're going to start with our Learning Center here. And inside our Learning Center, it's got a couple of different things. It's got research aids, and all these they are helpful guides for whenever you're first getting started with Ancestry and you don't really know what to expect or what to look for. So as you can see, there's a Get Started guide, a census guide that really guides you to the finer points of looking through census records. And then there's the Beyond the Basics for once you kind of start to pick up some steam with your research and just need kind of some more guides to digging further. So this is under the Research Aids tab of this part. But if you click on the one that's next to it that says Maps, that offers you resources by map. So you can click on each one of those states, and it's going to open different resources based off of the location that you're looking for. So that's really helpful, and it breaks it down, if you want your family history research or just their vital records, or if you're looking for land records, it's got that all broken down by location. So that's really handy. Now let me jump back. So the next thing that we're going to be covering is going to be our message boards. So in our message boards, this is something that is usually only available to in your paid subscription for Ancestry.com. You are able to access it through the library account. You're able to read through all of the message boards. And what these message boards is they're just members of Ancestry.com that ask questions, and it's basically just a community forum where people can kind of bounce ideas off of each other and answer each other's questions about family history. So maybe you found a great aunt or uncle of somebody else and you have that information that they're looking for. It's a good place to share it. However, if you're on the library account, you only have access to be able to read these. You don't have access to be able to add your own questions. So that's kind of one of the downsides of having the library edition, but then again, you have to remember all of the resources you have for free. So they are broken down by location as well as category and topic. So you can click on each of those. I'm just going to click on one to get us started. Let's look at the United States. It's got them further broken down. Let me just click through a couple of these. And you can see that there's different threads, kind of like you would find in a forum. So somebody posted a question about photos, somebody posted about DNA, and you can click on those and be able to read what their original question was, who originally posted it, but you just can't put in your own questions or answers. Now, let's see here. So our next point is going to be charts and forms. So let me go ahead and jump back there and show you what those are. So up here at this top bar, we're just going to hop on to charts and forms. So Ancestry provides a lot of really helpful charts for keeping track of all of your research finds. So up here, it's got one that's your ancestral chart. So that's usually what we think of as a family tree, where you mark yourself, your parents, your grandparents, and so on. There's a research calendar. If you're really getting into this and you want to hunt for specific things, and once you get started looking, you're going to start knowing what to look for. So if you're trying to break down a schedule of, okay, I want to go to this place and work on this project looking for this person, it just helps you keep track of all of these things. A correspondence record is really handy. Personally, for the library, we do a lot of help with research questions on family history. We can't do your family history for you, but we can answer some questions if you get stuck and help you look for specific records, especially if you know specific dates and times. But the correspondence record is really handy if you're trying to keep track of who you talked to, what you looked up, where they pointed you to, when you talked to them, and what answers they gave you for your research questions. So all of these are just based on helping you keep track of what you've found and who you've talked to. The census forms are another one of my favorites on Ancestry.com. And the reason for that is, as you'll see once we start going through some of these records, is that each census that was taken for different locations and for different decades has different information on each one of those. Let me open a couple of these. Let's start with the 1930 census. So as you can see, it's got, it's kind of hard to see because it's really tiny, but it's got a breakdown of columns that are all on top of the census. So if you were to open a census record, it would have all of these columns listed at the top. However, they're printed on a really old document. So they're kind of hard to read sometimes. So that's where this comes in handy. Ancestry's already done the hard work. They've gone and typed up what each one of those sections says. That way you can see clearly what that section is supposed to contain. So maybe if on your record it's blurred out, you might be able to zoom in here and be like, oh, okay, that square is supposed to say if they were a homeowner or if they rented. And that's really handy because it has it different for every single year, because each year had a different set of entries into that, a different set of columns and entries in it. So there's the 1941, looks completely different. It's got different entries on it as well. And then something really exciting too about the census that happened just this past month. In April, they released the 1950 census, which is really exciting for a lot of people that have relatives that might still be alive, that have some family memories. It's got a lot of really helpful information as well as photographs, because in this time frame, photographs were much more readily available. So the 1950 census information is available. However, on Ancestry, it's not indexed completely just yet. So you might be able to find some of your records by searching on Ancestry, but it's not 100% chance that you will, because it literally just got released this past month. But as time goes on, they'll finish indexing it and making it more searchable. So let's jump back to our slides here. So this is something I'm just going to cover briefly right now because we're going to come back to it in a minute. Searching Ancestry and how that looks like. So when you're searching Ancestry, there is one global search form that you can search off of. It's basically like Google. You type something in, Type in a couple details that you know, if you know their name, you know a certain year you're looking for, whether it was a birth or a marriage or death, a location, and it just kind of, it pulls up what you're expecting, you know, it tries to guess what it is you're looking for, just like Google does. So that's what a ranked search is. It's determining off of what you've entered, what it thinks that you would be most pertinent to your search. So that's what it brings up. So that's one way of searching, the global search form. The next would be to search by category. So in a minute, I'm going to be going over the different categories that are available through Ancestry. And what we like to suggest is a method called iterative searching, which means you're searching different versions of the same search. So for example, let's say I have a family member that I kind of sort of know his name was a certain thing. So for example, in my family line, I have a Pedro Lozano, or that's what we thought his name was. So I kept looking at Pedro Lozano, couldn't find anything on him. Turns out his name was Pedro Lázaro, so a completely different name. I kind of have a little sample here, right here, where I tried a couple of different iterations of his name. So I tried Lázaro, or Lozaro, and finally got to Lázaro, and that was the right one. So that's what iterative searching is, just trying again, but in different ways. And you can change different things in Ancestry that way. I'm also going to cover a shortcut that would have saved me a lot of time for figuring that out in a minute. So that's one of our tips, which we're going to come back to in a minute. Another is to start by casting a wide net and narrowing down from there. So it's really helpful when you're searching to start by only putting in what you know for a fact is true. And it seems like you might know something is for a fact true. Like for example, my great-grandpa, I was sure was Pedro Lozano. Well, he wasn't. But if I had put in lots of details about him, like this is his name, I know he was born here and this year and this date and this month, lots of details get lost over time. So if even one of those is wrong, it could skew your whole search. So sometimes it's best to just start very broad, very vague, this person's name and this area and this time frame, and then kind of narrow down as you figure out, oh, he was born on this date, I have his birth record. Oh, he died on this date, you know, because I have his death certificate. So that's something good to do, because as you can see, I put a little example here. When you start out broad, kind of it's a little overwhelming because you can get 4 million and something searches. So you want to start broad, but kind of narrow down as you're finding things that kind of back up your records. And so now I'm going to go ahead and jump into my card catalog so we can kind of look at that, because that's going to show you the different categories of information that's available to you. I'm just going to show you a really quick shortcut to an Ancestry Library Edition. If you ever want to jump back to the home page, just click that Ancestry Library there at the top corner, and that's going to get you back to your home page here. So from our home page, we want to go up to Search in the top, and that's going to pull a drop-down menu, and it's got a breakdown of the different main categories, but what we want to go to is the card catalog down here. So let me click on that. Okay, so here's our card catalog, and this is kind of like a library catalog where it holds all of the information for all of the different records and collections available to you. If you look closely on the side, I know the print's pretty small, but if you look on the side, it's got a breakdown of the different types and different categories of records. So we've got census and voter lists, birth, marriage, and death, military, immigration and travel, and lots of others down there. And in this main area, it's actually got specific collections in here. It kind of brings up the most popular ones and just kind of a random variety of them to start with. But you are able to search with the keyword. So if you know you're looking for 1950 census, you can type 1950 census, and just like Google, it's going to try and guess what you're trying to find. It'll also tell you what type of collection it's found in. So whether, you know, let's say the Washington U.S. County naturalizations, those are under immigration and travel. Or 1950 census, it's under census of voter lists. And that's handy because if you see something that looks like, oh, that's kind of like what I'm looking for, then you can know, well, then I can probably find what I'm looking for in this category. Right now, Ancestry has a bunch of them listed as new. That's what they have at the very top. because those are the most recently indexed collections that are available on Ancestry. And a lot of longtime genealogists, they've seen pretty much everything on there by now, so they're going back looking for the newest stuff that they haven't gotten to look through yet. And it also lists how many records are in each one of those, which some of these, the numbers are pretty impressive. And they just continue to grow. Every year more stuff is added. Okay, so let me see here. Okay, so I was just going to kind of go a little bit over this slide about our different groups of collections and things that we want to talk about here. So with our search field, I kind of already went over some of these tips, like casting a wide net and narrowing down. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about using wildcards for names that you're not sure of. And also, we talked about only putting in what you know for sure. And then we talked about narrowing by category and seeing what options are available for you in the collections. Let's see. So featured collections is another thing that's available on that screen. So your featured collections just give you an idea of what's in that group. That's what was listed on that card catalog page. And then those featured collections are really fun to browse because then you can explore them and get an idea of what exactly you're wanting to look for. The collection information is something that's available on each one of those records, which I'm going to open one in a minute and show you what I'm talking about here. It gives you details of what to expect from searching this collection and what's in it, as well as what to look for. I highly recommend reading this just to get a better idea of what it is that you're looking for and what you're looking at just to get you started. Each collection also provides an example of what the images in the collection contain, as well as search tips on how to get the most out of it. So let me open one and show you what I'm talking about here. Well, let's say, for example, if we did want to look at that 1950 census that we keep talking about. So we went to our card catalog and saw the overview. Let me jump back so I can get it clear from the start for you here. So we went to our card catalog, and over here we can browse and filter it by collection. So let's say we know for a fact we want to look for censuses. So I'm going to click Census. I know I'm looking for the 1950 census, so I'll go ahead and click on that. And then I know it's only the US census is what I'm looking for, because each country did their own records and their own censuses. So right at the very top, there's the 1950 United States Federal Census, so I'm going to click on that. And it does give you a little pop-up. The great thing about Ancestry is it's really user-friendly. When you hover over things, usually it'll tell you what they are, just in case you don't know for sure. It's really informative that way. So once you opened a collection, it's going to give you a search page where you can enter in the information that you know to search just that specific collection. So you got to remember this is different from our global search page, which I'll show you in a minute, that searches all of the collections at once. This one just specifically searches the census. So it's got different details that it's going to gather for you. And then, like I said, it's got down here at the very bottom, it's got some information for the source of where it came from, who organized it, as well as some details about that collection. This one doesn't have a whole lot of information on it just because, like I said, it's fairly new. But let's say if we clicked on another one on that home page, just to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about here. I was hoping it would show you more, but there's some where under this information it'll give you examples of the images as well as search tips. Not all of them have it, but some of the bigger collections do, where it'll tell you this is what to expect in this record, expect to find, like on a passenger register, maybe you'll find images of the passengers, where they're coming from, who their contact is, and such, as well as it'll provide example pictures of what those records look like. So even before you start digging through there, you know what to expect on that record. So you don't waste your time hunting for your person and then find out that record didn't have what you wanted in the first place. Okay. And then also they give awesome search tips for those individual records, which is really handy. So now let's jump into the different categories. So you saw I clicked into the census and voter lists on that list earlier. So this is just kind of an overview of what's available in Ancestry. Like I said, this is constantly changing and they're growing and adding more and more. But roughly, right now they have the 1790 through 1940 censuses available. Like I said, 1950 is in the process of being indexed, and what that means is they're just making it searchable. They are indexing each and every name that's on there, so when you look up your ancestor's name, it comes up. Right now, some of the names have been indexed, but not all of them so far. So I say 1790 through 1940, but that excludes 1890, and that's because there was a fire that destroyed a lot of census records. So the 1890s records for a lot of areas are gone. There's the census mortality schedules for 1850, 60, 70, and 80. There's the slave schedules for 1850 and 60, non-population schedules for 1850 and 1880, and then dependent, defective, and delinquent schedule, which is 1880 only. That was a special census collection that was kind of geared off of people that had accessibility issues or handicap, those kind of people that were dependent on others. And it was just trying to gauge that specific population. And then 1867 voter registration. So these records list the names of more than 139,000 men of the age 21 and over who were registered to vote in Texas between 1867 and 1869. And this was the first time that many of these men would be given the right to vote. And the records are of particular importance to African American research because they include the name of former slaves who now had the right to vote. So before this time period, it was really hard to track those African American ancestors, but these records kind of allow you a really good starting point for your family history if you need that. So that is there. So that's one of the collections. Another would be immigration and travel. That was another one I was trying to get the ship records off of because it has some really cool stuff on there, especially if you have an immigrant ancestor that came by Ellis Island or something like that. So like I said, excellent starting point if you know your ancestor came during a particular immigration wave. It has extremely detailed records that are kept and has many, many pictures. Hi, come on in. Yeah, many pictures. So we have had classes before where we showed examples of those. We had a staff member who had actual family members, and she was able to show us their record along with their pictures, and everything was really cool. For citizenship and naturalization records, it can be really tricky to hunt down for a lot of different reasons. One being, like I said, I thought I knew my ancestor's name, but I didn't. Names changed a lot for immigrants coming over where we had a anglicized name, where they changed their original name and made it more American. It's easier to find once you've collected more details about where your ancestor lived and moved throughout their lifetime. Another reason it can be tricky to track down is if, for example, as soon as they got off the boat, as soon as they got off the train, they're like, I need to start working on my naturalization. And they started registering in one county. Well, once they move and find their final place where they're going to live, they finished out their process. So they might have records from both of those places. It might be incomplete. It might have reset once they got to their final place. So once you kind of have nailed down where they've lived, then it's a little bit easier to find those records. For border crossings and passports, these are also another particular favorite of mine, especially since I have a lot of Hispanic heritage. I talked about this a lot in a video that I have online if you're ever looking more specifically for Hispanic heritage. Crossing records are sometimes inaccurate, and that's just because of the nature of the record. Somebody might have gotten nervous and said a wrong date or had a reason to lie, about where they were going, what they were doing. But they're extremely helpful in a search, and that's because they provide really rich details about the person that's traveling, similar to passenger lists, which passenger lists often list information not just about the person that was traveling, but also where they were going to, where they came from, who was their departure contact, and who was their arrival contact. And that's really awesome for attaching you to their family before they left and whenever they came here, who their family group was once they got here and who their family group was that got left behind. So it helps paint more of a rich picture of your family in that way. So border crossings have those same, that same kind of level of richness. So for some of my family members, I was able to find more people because I read those border crossings and saw, oh, he said he was going to see his aunt such and such, and I found lots more records for her, and so on. As for passports, they weren't required until World War I. but visiting immigrants might have applied for them if they knew that they're going to be traveling back and forth a lot, and they just knew that that would make the process a lot easier. So if you know of one of your immigrant ancestors that kept coming back, you can probably find more records like that for them. Crew lists are available to you. They're good if you know you had maybe a captain of a ship or somebody who worked on the ship in your family, or if you have a record of people that like to live on the sea. Immigration and emigration records. So those aren't exactly what they sound like. They're more bookkeeping type of records. So they're like ledgers and records, not quite as detailed as other forms of immigration records, but they do have some valuable information this is kind of a more advanced record if you really know what you're doing. And then a really fun one is ship pictures and descriptions. So once you go, let's say, to your passenger list and you find that your aunt such and such was on this ship, you can find a picture of the ship that they were on. So it's just a really fun one to have as memorabilia. Okay. Our next set of records, these are kind of your basic meat and potatoes of genealogy. This is what you're going off of to track your family, especially when you're first getting started. So your birth, baptism, and christening records, especially if you're in the US. In Texas, birth records were kept at the state level beginning in 1903, but they weren't consistent until the mid-1940s. So if you're looking before that time, you would have birth records, but they would maybe contain different information. You wouldn't know exactly what to expect on them, but after that point, they kind of became consistent across the board. Again, like I said, if you have Hispanic heritage, I would recommend looking at my video that I made because it does cover more in depth about Hispanic records, which are very detailed. However, they are all in Spanish. But if you have Texas history, you probably have some Hispanic history in there as well, so that's something good to look at. As far as marriage and divorce, the records weren't kept at the state level in Texas until 1966. So if you're looking before that, you might not find consistent records. You know, if you're looking for a marriage that happened before then or a divorce before then, you might not find the exact same thing on each record. And then this just kind of tells you in that specific collection that's available on Ancestry for Texas, the select county marriage records. These are the years available right now, 1837 through 2015. For death, burial, cemetery, and obituaries. In Texas, death records were kept at the state level beginning in 1903, but weren't consistent until mid-1940s. Kind of the same thing as those other records, just as Texas was forming and kind of really started to come together in its and making all of its records consistent. Moving on to military records. So they have available in that collection draft, enlistment, and service records. Again, we have another instance where records were lost. So if you ever can't track down your ancestor for one reason or another, hit a roadblock, it could be those records might be gone, you know, by natural causes or by an extreme circumstance like a fire or a hurricane that caused records to be lost or damaged. That just happens, unfortunately. But for the most part, Ancestry has a lot of records available. So 80% of Army service records from 1912 to 1960 and 75% of the Air Force service records from 1947 to 1964 are gone, sadly. So if you're looking for a family member in that time period, you might not be able to find them. It's got casualty records, it's got soldier, veteran, personnel, prisoner rolls and lists, as well as pension records. Those are really handy if you're trying to track down maternal line of somebody that was in the military, or you know, their wife and their family. That's really handy because you can usually track it down that way. Then there's histories, awards and decorations, news, disciplinary actions, and then everybody's favorite is always photos. You can find photos of family members that were in the military. And now I'm going to jump back into searching, but I'm actually going to exit out of my presentation here and go back to Ancestry. So earlier we went to, when we hit search, we went to our card catalog, but you can also go to just begin searching on this home page, or under search you can hit all of the records. They both take you to the same place. So if I do search all categories, it takes us to our global search page. So this is what I was talking about that searches all of the records available on Ancestry. So it's a lot of information to sort through. So don't be worried if you come up with a lot of search results at the very start. And when you look at it, so from your home page, it's going to be just at the very bottom. Okay, so from the search, you're going to see kind of like how I said earlier, whenever you're searching, you want to just start with the very basics and then kind of narrow down from there. So here it's just showing you first and middle name, last name, a place they might have lived. You don't even have to know for sure that that's exactly where they came from. A place they might have lived, and then a birth year. It's also got a tiny little calculator button that you can click on. Let's say if you don't know when exactly they were born off the top of your head, but you know that they were about 16 or 17 in 1940. You can type that in and it'll calculate it for you. But so when you hit search on that, that's going to pull up a whole list of search results. But I also want to show you that it has the show more options right here, this little drop down that opens up a whole lot more of information that you can plug in if you know it. When I first started searching, I thought more was better, you know? So the more I put in here, like I was like, oh, I know his mom, I know who the grandkid was, I know all of this, I'm gonna put this all in. It would return no results. And I was like, why is it not returning the results? I know this person was alive. And the reason is because it's trying to match every single one of those things exactly. So even one of them was wrong, or one thing wasn't on a specific record, it's not gonna find anything. Because for example, if you're looking for a marriage record for your parents, you're not going to find your name on that same record because you weren't born then. You weren't even the thought just yet. So that kind of messes with Ancestry. So less is more when it comes to your first couple of searches. But it is handy to know if you're searching for a specific record. So it has a location for adding an event such as birth, marriage, or death. If you're looking for a specific family member that let's say you know that your ancestor's name was John, you don't know his last name. Well, there's probably lots of Johns in the world, no matter where you're looking. So sometimes it can be helpful to put somebody else that you know might be on that record. So if you know his name was John, but you know the mom's name was such and such, if you put both of their names on there, you're more likely to find that record. It's got a lot of other details on there as well that you can plug in. But like I said, I recommend starting very broad, very basic, and working your way down once you know. So I'm just going to do a sample one just so we can see what we find, just so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and look up one of my ancestors, Jose Benito. And I know he was in Venado, Mexico. I'm going to leave the birth year out for now, just so I can get more results on here. So whenever you put in a search, it's going to come up with a bunch of results on there. You can see on mine it has 54,188 because I did have a very broad search term to start with. I just had a name and I had a location. I didn't have any kind of year in there. So this could have been Jose Benito's born all throughout, you know, the history that's available on Ancestry. But I do want to show you this because I want it to have all of these options available so you can see what's available to you. There's lots of ways to filter this. Again, like we saw in our card catalog, it was split up by categories. So there's census and voter list, birth, marriage, and death, military, and so on. All of these records are records that contain that name in that place. So there's different birth, marriage, and death records, over 10,000 that have something similar to that. You would want to narrow it down more to find who it is you're looking for. Right here it has some tools to help you narrow that down specifically. So if you know, right here it's got broad going to exact. So it's searching the name Jose broadly. That means it's searching for names that are similar to Jose as well, not just Jose exactly. I could switch that to exact so it only searches for the name Jose and not like, let's say, Josh or a different form of that name, you know. It's just searching for those specifically. You can switch that to exact. I usually don't mess with those and I try and get more exact with my search. Just because sometimes it can be limiting and it can take out some of your good search results. And then over here on this side, you see the actual records themselves. So let's take a look at, I want to see if I can find one. Okay, I think, yeah, this one's my ancestor here. So Jose Romualdo. So I'm just going to hover over this record so you can kind of see what it is. When you hover over that name, it's going to do a little pop-up that has some details that's inside of that record. So here we've got his name that was listed on that record, listed out in full, so Jose Romualdo Lucio Benito. His gender that was written on the baptism certificate, his baptism date, his baptism place, his father's name, and his mother's name. So you can see with just this one search that we found a whole lot of other information, and all of that information can be plugged into their own searches. So that's kind of how I recommend going off of Ancestry for your first few searches, is start very broad and then take that information and use that to form more specific searches. So now we know his father's name, we can look up his father's record with the same information that's plugged in here. Because some records, like for example, marriage records, are extremely detailed, especially in the Catholic Church and Hispanic records. For example, a marriage record will list your name, your spouse's name, how old each one of you were, where you got married, what time, as usual. But sometimes they'll list parents' names and even grandparents' names at times. So you can get a lot of information from just a single record and use that to spawn off into a bunch of other records. So that's just kind of getting you started. I'm going to click on one just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. Once you click on it, let's see, so this one doesn't have an image. Some of them have images, some of them don't. I usually look for images because I want to see what is exactly written on that record. Let's find one here. Here it is. Okay. So for example, this is a marriage record of one of my ancestors here, Diego Ledesma and Rosa Tobias. So it's got their information on it. And even here in this little detailed list, it lists out all of their different names and everything typed out. So whenever I say that they're indexing a document, like with the 1950 census, they're taking something that's printed like that and individually typing up, or using software to individually type all of these things up. But sometimes those things get mistyped just because we're humans, and even our computers mess up, as we all know. So for example, with one of my ancestors, Elvira de la Fuente, when I went looking for her record, I couldn't find it simply because it was mistyped. When I finally did find it, using other information I'd found, they had it as Elvira Torrente, because whoever read it, and the writing was in cursive, it was hard to read, so I don't blame them. But I knew who that person was from the rest of their details and their family members. But to them, they thought it was Torrente, so they entered it as Elvira Torrente, and I couldn't search it because it was mistyped. So keep that in mind when you're searching. You might have to do what I call a sideways search. Find, let's say, a sister or a brother, and then find other documents that might have them on it, or find an aunt or uncle, and so on. And then just kind of move your way in. But so that's what their details look like that are on the record. But whenever you open it, it has way more information in here. So this is in Spanish and in very tiny cursive, so it's hard to read. But I can tell you that this one lists information about these two's parents, as well as how old these two were when they got married. And that's important because knowing how old they were and knowing when this record is from tells you their birth year. So I can go back with that information and find their birth record, and on that birth record find even more information. This also tells you their parents' names and their grandparents' names, as well as their ages. So for example, here it's got somebody was 50. I think this was her mom, Gregoria Martinez, was 50 years old at the time of their marriage. So you could go find her birth record 50 years before this, and so on. So you're just taking information from here and jumping further back and further back and further back from record to record. So with that being said, that's just kind of a broad look at the basics of searching and the basics of genealogy research. We do plan on having more classes in the future that kind of delve into more detail. Like for example, that Hispanic heritage one that we had was really helpful for specifically like this, where it's baptism records, marriage records from the Catholic Church that are really detailed. But so with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to our workshop portion. So I'm actually going to end this recording, and we can just kind of start messing around with Ancestry, and we'll answer your questions.
Thanks for watching the lecture. There were a couple quick points I wanted to cover that didn't quite make it into the lecture time, but are helpful in starting your ancestry journey. One that I mentioned was the use of wildcards in a search. When you're searching an ancestor's name, sometimes you don't know the correct spelling. For example, in my lecture I talked about my great-grandfather Pedro Lozano. However, I also had an excellent example with another family member with the last name of Ledesma. Now, I have lots of Ledesmas on one side of my family. However, they all spell their last name differently. So what do we do with these names that we come across that have different or alternate spellings or multiple spellings? The answer to this is wildcards. So let me go ahead and type this in and give you an example. So for example, let's look up my ancestor, Diego Ledesma. So I have some ancestors that spell this name with an S and some that spell it with a Z. So Ledesma. Now, so if I am not sure which letter I want to use, but I want to turn up results for both, usually Ancestry is pretty good at coming up with things that are off by maybe one letter or two letters. But just to be safe, you can also plug in an asterisk or a star wherever there is an unknown letter. So this would be, for example, on Diego Ledesma, if I want to search for the S or the Z. On my great-grandfather Pedro Lázaro, something I could have done was also replace a wild card on the letters that I wasn't sure of. So I could either put even just an L with a wild card. That would count as his whole last name. However, that could also bring up a bunch of other Pedros with different names starting with L. So the more you know, the better, but it is a great way to do it if you're really unsure. So I could have put something like this to where we could kind of see that it would be a name similar to this, but it could have differences in letters. This is really helpful if, for example, you have a name such as Julian or Julio or something that you're not sure of that you know starts with Jul. This would turn up a Julio, Julian, Julius, all different kinds of variations of the ending of a name. So you can use it on the end as well if you're just not sure of how a name ended. Sometimes names, for example, like my grandma Elvira de la Fuente, where the name is completely misspelled or the person read it wrong, this is really helpful. You might know what your ancestor's name is, but whoever was reading the document might not have and might have entered a name incorrectly. So let's say if your uncle's name was Julio, but the handwriting on the document was so messy, they might have read it as Julian or Julius. So this is just helpful to bring up any of those similar names. Finally, I also wanted to talk about some resources that are available to you in trying to search your ancestry. One being Ancestry.com's YouTube channel. They have lots of playlists and videos that discuss finding your ancestry, as well as the different finer points, such as, for example, DNA, how to do your family history and genealogy for beginners. They have whole playlists that are extremely helpful resources. Particularly helpful are the videos by the Barefoot Genealogist on Ancestry. She has lots of really easy to understand and easy to follow videos that are great for beginners. Finally, on our library's website, we have our Niche Academy. So this Niche Academy is full of all different kinds of tutorials for different things that are provided by other surrounding libraries as well as our own. And all of these are available to you for free through our library's website. As you saw, you just want to go to our homepage, click on that niche tutorials, and once you're here, you can search. You can search for Ancestry. And it'll pull up a couple of different videos that are available that have lots of really helpful tips on search basics and how to search the card catalog, just like we talked about today. And they might cover some things that even I missed. So definitely give those a watch. So thanks again for watching and learning with us today in this lecture. I hope you really picked up on a couple of things that'll help you in your search as you start with Ancestry. Bye-bye.